I need you to get pregnant for David, Naomi said, her words hanging in the air like a bombshell. Anita stared in disbelief, her eyes wide with shock. What? Naomi looked away, unable to meet her sister's gaze. Please, Anita, I don't know what else to do. I don't care, Naomi, Anita snapped, her voice trembling. I want to see my child. Naomi froze, the words cutting through the air like a blade. Naomi and David had a kind of marriage that everyone admired. They lived in a spacious, well-furnished home in one of the upscale neighborhoods in Lagos. The house was a reflection of their status, elegant but not too extravagant. With soft walls painting, tasteful decor, and large windows that let in plenty of sunlight, it was a home built on love, or at least that's what it seemed to everyone who knew them. Naomi was always smiling whenever they attended family gatherings, and David's hand was always gently resting on her back, a sign of affection that never went unnoticed. David, a businessman, was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He made sure that Naomi had everything she needed, from the latest car models to surprise weekend getaways. He was a provider in every sense of the word. To him, Naomi was his world, and it was clear that he was deeply in love with her. He had never been the type to demand too much. He gave Naomi space and freedom, allowing her to be herself, whether it was managing her fashion boutique or simply spending time with her friends. He wanted her to be really happy. Naomi, on her part, adored David. She was the kind of wife who ensured his meals were prepared just the way he liked, and his clothes were always neatly pressed, and that the house was always in order. She loved him deeply, but despite all the love they shared, there was something missing: a child. Every time she looked around the house, she couldn't help but imagine how different it would feel with the sound of a baby's laughter filling the rooms. The nursery she had mentally designed remained empty, a constant reminder of what she didn't have. At first, the absence of a child didn't bother her much. It had been only a year or two since they got married, and both Naomi and David agreed they wanted to enjoy their marriage before starting a family. But as time went on, Naomi couldn't ignore the whispers of doubt growing louder in her mind. 3 years now has passed, and still there was no baby. Each month, her hopes were crushed as she was reminded again that she wasn't pregnant. David never pressured her about it, and neither did his family. His mother, a quiet but kind woman, never once asked Naomi about children. Still, Naomi knew it was only a matter of time before people started asking questions. Their unspoken expectation hovered over her like a cloud, slowly darkening with each passing month. Her worries began to eat away at her. She would sit for hours, staring out of the window, watching children from the neighborhood play in the street, wondering if she would ever have one of her own. Every time she saw a new baby photo on her social media feed or received news of a friend's pregnancy, she felt a small stab of pain in her chest. She hid her feelings from David. Of course, he had no idea how much this was affecting her, but Naomi was a proud woman, and the last thing she wanted was for anyone to pity her. Despite her internal struggles, Naomi maintained the appearance of a happy wife. She smiled, she laughed, and she acted as though nothing was wrong. But in the quiet moments when David wasn't around, the silence in their home became almost unbearable. She felt the emptiness creeping into every corner of her heart, and no amount of affection from David could fill it. Some nights, Naomi would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. She thought about what the future held. Would they ever have a child? Would David still love her if they couldn't? These questions kept her up at night, and the lack of answers gnawed at her soul. David, oblivious to the storm brewing inside Naomi, continued to shower her with love. He would return home from work with small gifts, kiss her on the forehead, and ask her how her day was. "I'm fine," Naomi would reply with a smile, but deep down she wasn't fine. She felt as though she was failing him, failing their marriage. The weight of time was heavy, and it only grew heavier with each passing day. Though no one said anything, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching, waiting for the day she would announce that she was pregnant. It was as though a clock was ticking, and with each second, the pressure mounted. Naomi had always been a strong woman, but this was something she couldn't control, and that terrified her. The harder she tried to push the thoughts away, the more they consumed her. David remained patient, gentle and loving, but Naomi's anxiety began to seep into their relationship in small ways. She would snap at him over little things, like leaving his shoe in the wrong place or forgetting to pick up something from the store. And each time, she would feel immediate guilt, knowing that it wasn't really David she was upset with, it was herself. But could she explain to him? How could she tell him about the void that was growing bigger inside her with every passing day? She kept hoping that if she waited long enough, things would change. Maybe they would have a baby, maybe the pain would go away, but nothing really changed. And as time dragged on, Naomi found it harder and harder to hide her feelings. Naomi's younger sister, Anita, arrived one humid afternoon, carrying 2 large suitcases and a tired smile. David welcomed her warmly, helping her bring in her bags, while Naomi stood at the doorway, a little more reserved. She hadn't been expecting Anita's visit, but it wasn't a complete surprise either. Anita had called her the week before, explaining that she had lost her apartment due to a misunderstanding with her landlord. She needed a place to stay for a while, just until she could find something new. Naomi, feeling obligated as the older sister, agreed without hesitation. Anita was the kind of person who brought life into any room. At 28, she had a bright personality, always chatting about something or the other. She had a way of making friends easily and was usually the center of attention wherever the sisters were together. Her energy constructed Naomi's more calm and reserved nature, which made them an interesting pair. Anita was single, carefree, and still finding her way in life, while Naomi, as 32, had settled into the quiet rhythm of marriage. For the first time in a few days after Anita moved in, everything seemed so normal. The sisters would catch up over dinner, and Anita's laughter echoed through the house, filling the space with a lightness that Naomi hadn't felt in a very long time. David too enjoyed having Anita around. She had a way of making him laugh, especially when she poked fun at Naomi for being too serious. Naomi would smile at their banter, but her mind was often elsewhere. Anita, ever the observant one, began to notice the subtle changes in Naomi's behavior. At first, it was small things. Naomi would sit quietly at the dinner table, barely engaging in conversation, her eyes distant. Sometimes she would excuse herself early, claiming to be tired, and retreat to her room, leaving Anita and David to finish their meals alone. When Anita tried to talk to her, Naomi would respond, but there was something forced about it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and she seemed distracted, as though she was carrying a weight that no one else could see. One evening, as they sat in the living room watching a movie, Naomi excused herself and went upstairs. Anita noticed the tension in her sister's posture as she left the room, and once Naomi was out of earshot, she turned to David. "Is everything okay with your wife?" Anita asked casually, her eyes on the TV screen. David sighed, shifting in his seat. "I've noticed she's been really different lately," he admitted. "She says everything is fine, but I don't know, she's not herself." Anita nodded slowly, her suspicions confirmed. She had seen it too. Naomi was always deep in thought, lost in her own world. Even when they tried to engage her in conversation, it felt like she was somewhere else entirely. The following day, Anita decided to have a talk with Naomi. She found her sister in her room, sitting by the window, staring out at nothing in particular. The curtains were half drawn, allowing just enough light to illuminate the room in a soft glow. Naomi didn't seem to notice Anita standing by the door at first, lost in her thoughts as usual. "Naomi," Anita said gently, walking into the room and sitting on the edge of the bed. "What's going on with you? You've been acting strange ever since I got here." Naomi didn't turn to face her. "There is nothing wrong, Anita," she replied, her voice low and unconvincing. "Don't lie to me," Anita pressed. "I've known you my whole life. I can tell when something is bothering you, and this is deep." Naomi let out a deep sigh and still avoiding her sister's gaze. "It's nothing really, I'm just really tired." Anita wasn't buying it. "Tired? Naomi, you've been locking yourself in your room for hours. You barely talk at dinner. Even your husband is worried." Naomi finally turned her head slightly, but her eyes were still distant, as if she was guiding some deep secrets. "It's about a child," she said quietly, almost to herself. "A child?" Anita repeated, confused. "It's someone pressuring you? Your husband David? Or his family?" "No," Naomi shook her head. "It's not like that. No one is pressuring me. Not yet, anyway." "Then what is it?" Anita asked, her voice softening with concern. She moved closer, trying to reach her sister emotionally. Naomi hesitated, her fingers nervously twisted on the edge of her blouse. "It's just a matter of time, Anita. Sooner or later, people are going to start asking questions. 3 years, and still no child. How long before anyone starts wondering?" Anita's heart sank at her sister's words. She had never really thought about it before, but now that Naomi mentioned, it really made sense. The pressure, the expectation, it was all too much for her sister to carry on her own. For the next few days, Anita kept a close eye on Naomi. She sympathized with her, but she could tell there was more to the story than Naomi was letting on. The house, once filled with Anita's laughter and light-hearted teasing, now felt heavy with unspoken tension. Naomi was clearly struggling, and Anita wasn't sure how to help her. She wanted to do something, anything, to ease her sister's burden, but she wasn't sure what that could be. As the days went by, Naomi's mood didn't improve. If anything, she seemed more withdrawn, more distant. Anita watched helplessly as her sister disappeared further into herself, the weight of her worries becoming too much to bear. It was a quiet evening when another conversation finally happened. Naomi and Anita sat in the living room, the soft glow of a table lamp casting shadows on the walls. Naomi was staring blankly at the floor, lost in her own thoughts. Again, while Anita observed her sister in silence, growing more and more worried. Anita couldn't take it any longer. The silence between them had become unbearable. Then she spoke. "Naomi, what is really going on? Is it still the issue of a child?" Naomi's eyes flickered up for a moment, meeting her sister's concerned gaze, but she quickly looked away. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she fidgeted with the hem of her dress. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to deny it, but then something inside broke. Naomi shook her head, blinking away the tears that had begun to form in her eyes. "Is it not worth thinking about?" "Naomi, why are you worrying about that?" Anita asked softly. "David loves you. He has never said anything about it." "Because I know how people are." Naomi's voice broke as she interrupted her sister. "It's been 3 years, Anita, 3 years and nothing. People will soon start talking. They always do, and I can't." She stopped mid-sentence, her breath hitching as she struggled to hold back a sob. Anita reached out and placed a comforting hand on Naomi's arm. "Naomi, you can't think like that. You're putting too much pressure on yourself. What about waiting for God's time? Don't be worried. You will have children." Naomi didn't respond. She stared down at her hands, her shoulders shaking slightly. "I just don't know what to do anymore," Naomi whispered. "I feel like I'm feeling everyone. David, his family, my own self." "You're not feeling anyone," Anita said firmly, squeezing Naomi's arms. But Naomi shook her head. "You don't understand, Anita. I can't have a baby." Anita froze, her eyes widening as she processed her sister's words. What? What do you mean you can't have a baby? Naomi buried her face in her hands, sobbing softly. It took a moment before she could find her voice again. I don't have a womb, she choked out between sobs. I've had to have it removed years ago, after one of the abortions I had in the university. Anita gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. Oh my God, Naomi. I didn't even know, she whispered, unable to find the right words. She had always known her sister had lived recklessly during her university days, but she had no idea things had been this bad. Naomi wiped her tears away with the back of her hand, her face flushed with shame. I never told anyone, she said, not even David. I was so scared. I didn't know how to tell him, how to explain that I could never give him a child. Anita was speechless. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like an eternity. You didn't tell David? Anita finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Not even him? Naomi shook her head. No, I couldn't. I couldn't risk losing him. I told Felix, and he broke off the engagement. I couldn't go through that again, not with David. He would have left me too, I just know it. Naomi, you should have told him, Anita said softly. David loves you. I'm sure he would have handled it better than Felix. Naomi shook her head. You don't understand, Anita. I can't lose him. David is everything to me. I can't tell him. I just can't. Anita sat back, overwhelmed by the weight of what Naomi had been carrying all this time. She had no idea her sister had been living with such a heavy secret, a secret that had shaped her entire marriage. So what do we do now? Anita asked, her voice trembling slightly as the reality of the situation sank in. Naomi hesitated for a moment, her eyes full of desperation as she looked at her sister. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. Then finally she spoke, her voice so quiet, Anita almost didn't hear her. Naomi took a deep breath. She looked down, unable to meet Anita's gaze. I need you. I need you to carry my baby. Anita blinked, not sure if she had heard correctly. Surrogacy, she asked, her mind struggling to catch up with the weight of the request. I need you to get pregnant for David, Naomi said, her words hanging in the air like a bombshell. Anita stared in disbelief, her eyes wide with shock. What? Naomi looked away, unable to meet her sister's gaze. Please, Anita, I don't know what else to do. Anita stood up abruptly, shaking her head. You want me to do what? She exclaimed. No, absolutely not. I can't. I can't do that. Naomi didn't respond, but the look on her face said it all. She was desperate, willing to do anything to fix the situation, no matter how crazy the plan sounded. Anita paced the room, her mind racing. This is insane, Naomi. You can't ask me to do something like that. God forbid. She hissed in frustration and stormed out of the room, leaving Naomi sitting alone, her shoulders shaking as she cried silently into her hands. For the next few days, the tension between sisters was thick and uncomfortable. Anita was angry, confused, and unsure of what to do. She couldn't believe Naomi had asked such a thing of her, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the pain in her sister's eyes. Naomi was clearly desperate, and Anita didn't know how to help her. David noticed the shift between them two. One morning, as he and Anita were getting ready to leave for work, he glanced at her curiously. Is everything between you and Naomi okay? He asked, his voice laced with concern. Anita forced a smile. It's nothing, David. Just some sister stuff. David didn't push the issue, but the unease lingered in the air. Anita stayed silent, her mind still reeling from Naomi's request. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. The weight of the impossible decision bearing down on her. Every time she looked at David, guilt gnawed at her, even though she hadn't done it yet. Days passed, and the easy silence between the sisters continued. The atmosphere in the house was thick with tension, and Naomi's desperation hung over every interaction. One afternoon, as they stood in the kitchen preparing lunch, Naomi approached Anita cautiously, her voice low but serious. We need to talk. she said, breaking the silence that had settled between them for days. Anita sighed, knowing what was coming. She placed the knife she had been using down on the counter and turned to face her sister. "I've already said yes, Naomi," she replied, her voice edged with frustration. "But I need to understand, if I get pregnant, what happens next? How do we explain this?" Naomi bit her lip, thinking for a moment. "Let's get pregnant first," she said, avoiding the deeper implications of their plan. "We'll figure out the rest later." Anita frowned, but she didn't argue. Her mind was filled with doubt, but the look in Naomi's eyes told her there was no room for second thoughts. The task ahead of her was clear, even though it made her stomach turn. The next few days were very difficult. Anita felt like she was living someone else's life as she tried to put their plan into action. Seducing David was no simple task. He was a good man, faithful and loving towards Naomi, oblivious to the undercurrent of deceit slowly building around him. Each time Anita tried to subtly flirt or get closer to him, David barely noticed. It wasn't that David didn't like her. He had always treated Anita like family, but he didn't see her that way. To him, she was Naomi's younger sister and nothing more. Every time she tried to linger in a conversation with him or brush her hand against his arm, David would give her a friendly smile and go back to talking about work, or worse, suggest that she was overworking herself. After weeks of failed attempts, Anita grew frustrated. David remained completely oblivious, and her advances were fruitless. She began to avoid being alone with him, feeling awkward and embarrassed by her repeated failures. David started noticing the tension in the house and even mentioned to Naomi that maybe it was time for Anita to move out, thinking the close quarters were causing some strain. "I think Anita is getting restless," David had said one evening as they prepared for bed. "Maybe it's time she finds her own place." Naomi had forced a smile, brushing off his concerns. "She'll be fine, David. She just needs more time," she assured him, but inside she felt the pressure mounting. With Anita's seduction attempts failing miserably, Naomi grew more desperate. Every passing day felt like a ticking clock, as she could feel the pressure mounting as David began to grow more suspicious. She couldn't afford to let Anita leave without executing their plan. Late one night, after another failed attempt, Naomi sat down with Anita in the living room. The silence between them was thick with frustration, and Anita could sense that Naomi was growing very impatient. "I don't think I can do this, Naomi," Anita admitted, her voice low. "David isn't falling for it. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not." Naomi stared at her for a long moment, her mind racing. She couldn't afford for this plan to fail, not after everything they had been through. "We need to change the approach," she said quietly, her voice steady with determination. "If he won't fall for you, we'll have to make sure it happens another way." Anita frowned, not understanding what her sister was suggesting. "What do you mean?" Naomi hesitated, knowing that what she was about to propose would cross a line they could never come back from. "We will drug him," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You will take him to bed after he's unconscious. That way, there is no way for him to resist." Anita's eyes widened in horror. "Naomi, are you insane? That's going too far. I can't do that to David. It's wrong." Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to grab Anita's hand. "Please, Anita, you have to understand. I don't have any other option. This is the only way I can keep my marriage. I need you, please." Anita hesitated, torn between the love she felt for her sister and the disgust she felt for what Naomi was asking of her. She knew it was wrong, but Naomi's desperation was overwhelming. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding slowly. "Okay," she whispered, feeling sick to her stomach. "I'll do it." The plan was to put into motion the following night. Naomi made sure to spike David's drink at dinner, and as the evening wore on, he began to grow sluggish and disoriented. "I think I'm going to bed too early," he said, rubbing his eyes as he stood up from the couch. Anita's heart pounded in her chest as she watched him stagger towards the bedroom. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her, but it was too late to back out now. She waited until Naomi signaled her with a nod, and then she followed David down the hallway, her footsteps heavy with dread. The rest of the night passed in a blur. The plan worked, and the next morning, David had no memory of what had transpired. Naomi acted as though nothing had happened, going about her day as if the betrayal hadn't occurred. But Anita couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that gnawed at her, even as Naomi assured her that everything would be fine. A few weeks later, Anita found out she was pregnant. Naomi's reaction was one of pure joy. She hugged her sister tightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have saved my life." But while Naomi celebrated, Anita felt conflicted. The reality of what they had done weighed heavily on her, and the knowledge that she was carrying David's child filled her with a mix of emotions: guilt, shame, and an undeniable connection to the life growing inside of her. Naomi quickly devised another plan. "We will tell David that I am pregnant," she explained excitedly. "Then I will insist on going abroad to give birth. You will join me later, and you will have the baby there. No one will ever know." Anita nodded dumbly, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the house was filled with a warm, lazy silence. David sat on the couch, flipping through channels, while Anita was seated at the dining, her mind wandering through the chaos of the past few weeks. Naomi had been unusually quiet all morning, and Anita had the feeling that something big was about to happen. Naomi finally appeared in the living room, her steps measured, a soft smile on her face. She looked at David, who hadn't yet noticed her presence. Clearing her throat, she caught his attention. "David, can we talk for a moment?" Naomi said, her voice gentle but carrying an edge of excitement. David turned the TV off, curious. "Sure, babe, what's up?" He sat up straighter, sensing that this wasn't an ordinary conversation. Naomi took a deep breath, her eyes twinkling as she placed her hand on her belly. "I am pregnant," she said softly, watching David's reaction closely. For a second, time seemed to stop. David stared at her, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. His eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with pure joy. "You are pregnant," he repeated, as though needing to hear it again. Naomi nodded, her smile widening. "Yes, David, we are going to have a baby." The words sank in, and in an instant, David was on his feet, wrapping his arms around Naomi, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Oh my God, Naomi, this is the best news I've ever had." His voice shook with emotion, and he kissed her forehead, then her arms, overwhelmed with happiness. Naomi laughed softly, playing the part of the joyful, expectant mother. "I knew you would be happy." "Happy?" David pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "This is the greatest gift you could ever give me, Naomi. A baby, our baby." He placed his hand over her belly, a look of wonder on his face. At the dining, Anita had heard everything. Her heart sank. The announcement should have filled her with joy. After all, this was the moment they had planned for. But instead, a wave of guilt and sadness washed over her. Anita couldn't look at Naomi without feeling a deep sense of betrayal. She had agreed to help her sister, but the sight of David's joy, his genuine happiness over what he believed was his wife's pregnancy, tore her apart. It wasn't Naomi carrying David's child, it was her. She pressed her hand against the table, her head spun with conflicting emotions. She wanted to be happy for her sister, but the lies, the deception, it was all becoming too much. Naomi, still in David's embrace, glanced towards the dining where Anita sat frozen. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Naomi's look was triumphant, filled with a strange satisfaction that made Anita feel like an outsider in her own life. David hadn't noticed the silent exchange between the sisters. He was too caught up in his own euphoria. "I can't believe it, I'm going to be a father," he whispered, almost to himself. "I need to call my mom, I need to tell everyone I am going to be a father." Naomi quickly stopped him, grabbing his hands. "Let's wait a bit before we tell everyone," she suggested gently. "I want to make sure everything goes smoothly before we announce it to the world." David nodded, understanding. "Of course. Whatever you want, my darling." He looked at her, his eyes filled with love. "Thank you, Naomi. You've made me the happiest man in the world." Anita couldn't take it anymore. The joy, the lies, the pain. It was too overwhelming. She quickly turned away, excusing herself quietly from the room. As Anita retreated to her room, she leaned against the door, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. She had thought she could go through with the plan, but now, seeing David's reaction, his innocent joy, made everything feel so much worse. The baby growing inside her was David's child, but he would never know the truth. He would never know the real mother of his daughter or son. And Anita, for the first time, felt the true weight of the decision she had made. Convincing David to agree to Naomi's sudden desire to give birth abroad wasn't a straightforward ask. David had always imagined being part of the entire process, right from the doctor's visit to the delivery. He wanted to be by Naomi's side as she carried their child, to feel the kicks and share in the joy of their growing family. But Naomi had a different plan in mind. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Naomi brought up the idea. "Babe, I've been thinking," she started, her tone soft but serious. "I want to have our child abroad, somewhere we can have access to the best medical care, both for antenatal and postnatal." David frowned, surprised. "Abroad? But we have good hospitals here." "Naomi, besides, why now?" Naomi put on the best smile she could muster, though her heart raced underneath her calm exterior. "I know, but I've always dreamt of having our baby in London. You know, a place where everything is familiar, and we won't have to deal with the stress of people visiting all the time. Just us, focused on our child." David looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to understand. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," Naomi said, squeezing his hand. "I'm certain. It would mean so much to me." David hesitated, seeing the excitement and determination in Naomi's eyes. He finally gave in. "If it makes you happy, Naomi, then we will do it." Naomi exhaled quietly, relieved that David had agreed. She had rehearsed her words for days, knowing how difficult it would be to sell the idea without arousing suspicion. Now, the first part of their plan was in motion. Naomi played the role of the shrewd, expectant mother perfectly in the weeks that followed. She picked out baby clothes, prepared a nursery, and talked endlessly about how much she was looking forward to being a mother. David was eager to become a father and was fully invested. He had no idea that everything was a carefully crafted lie. When the time came, Naomi packed her bags and left for London, her heart racing as she boarded the plane. David, although sad to see her go, trusted her completely. He promised to visit once it was closer to her due date, unaware that Naomi's journey had far less to do with welcoming their child and everything to do with the secret plan she and Anita had set into motion. A few weeks later, Anita joined Naomi in London. Anita, who had grown increasingly anxious about the entire situation, found herself standing in the hospital room, moments away from delivering the baby she knew would never be truly hers. The pain of childbirth was nothing compared to the emotional turmoil she felt, but there was no turning back now. The moment her baby was born, Anita felt a surge of love she hadn't expected. As she held her daughter for the first time, tears filled her eyes. Naomi watched from across the room, her own emotions mixed. The plan was working, but she couldn't ignore the bond forming between Anita and the baby. A few days later, the news of Naomi's delivery reached David. He was ecstatic. Over the phone, Naomi played her part well, gushing about their beautiful baby girl. She sent photos from the hospital, pretending to be the proud new mother, while Anita, still recovering, watched from the shadows. David could hardly contain his excitement. He shared the news with family and friends, posting photos online and counting down the days until his wife and baby would return home. A month after the birth, Naomi returned to Nigeria with the baby, leaving behind the secrets that had been buried in London. David had been counting down the days to their reunion, and when he finally saw Naomi step put out of the airport, cradling their daughter in her arms, his heart swelled with so much joy. He rushed to their side, wrapping his arms around her and kissing her forehead. "She's so beautiful," David whispered, his eyes shining with happiness as he looked at the baby. Naomi smiled, her heart pounding in her chest. "Meet your daughter," she said. David took the little girl in his arms, his face lighting up with wonder. "She's perfect," he whispered, cradling her gently. He had never felt such a deep, immediate connection to anyone before. This was his child, his blood, and nothing in the world could make him happier. Naomi played her role flawlessly. She called over the baby, feeding her, changing diapers, and posting photos on social media to keep up appearance. She was even able to breastfeed her baby through induced lactation. Friends and family sent congratulatory messages, delighted by the news of the new arrival. David proudly shared pictures of his daughter, oblivious to the tangled web of deception that had surrounded him. Meanwhile, Anita stayed in London for another week. The separation from the baby tore at her heart, but she knew she had no choice. The plan had to be seen through to the end, no matter how much it hurt. She spent days staring at photos of the baby on her phone, feeling the ache of a mother who couldn't hold her own child. When Anita finally returned to Nigeria, Naomi was there to greet her. But instead of bringing her back to the family home, Naomi took her directly to a new apartment she had rented for her. The apartment was spacious, with everything Anita could possibly need, but it felt cold and empty. "This is for you," Naomi said, handing over the keys. "I wanted to make sure you had your own space now. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." Anita nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you," she said quietly, though her heart ached with every word. No apartment or material comforts could fill the void that now consumed Anita. Every time she scrolled through social media and saw photos of Naomi with Blessing, her baby girl, a sharp pain stabbed her at her chest. She had thought she could go through with this pain, but now the reality of her sacrifice was almost too much to bear. David, oblivious to the turmoil within sisters, continued to adore his daughter, while Naomi savored the life she had always dreamt of, not knowing that the lies she had built her world on were growing more fragile by the day. The days after Naomi's return from London were filled with mixed emotions for Anita. On one hand, she had fulfilled her promise to her sister, giving her the child she so desperately wanted. On the other hand, the sight of Naomi cradling the baby, her baby, brought a sharp pang of longing that Anita hadn't expected to feel. At first, Anita tried to visit often, making excuses to drop by the house to see the baby. Naomi allowed her visits, but something in Naomi's behavior had shifted. Each time Anita came over, Naomi kept a careful distance between her and the baby girl, whom they had named Blessing. "She's sleeping," Naomi would say when Anita asked to hold her, or "she just ate, it's better not to disturb her." It was always something, some reason to keep Blessing out of Anita's arms. Anita watched as Naomi held the baby close, cooing softly and rocking her in a way that was so natural, so effortless, that it made Anita's chest tighten with jealousy. That should be me, she thought. Naomi, meanwhile, acted as if nothing was amiss, but the tension between sisters grew. The one strong bond they shared was slowly unraveling, one unspoken word at a time. David, oblivious to the undercurrent of the tension, was enjoying fatherhood. He doted on Blessing every chance he got, taking photos, bringing home little gifts, and even getting up in the middle of the night to help Naomi with the baby. She was proud of his new family and often thankful for Naomi for making his dreams come true. But Anita felt increasingly like an outsider, watching from the shadows as the life she should have had unfolded before her very own eyes. One rainy evening, after weeks of being kept at arm's length, Anita reached her breaking point. She had shown up at Naomi's house once again, hoping, begging for a chance to hold Blessing. But Naomi, as usual, made an excuse. "Not today, Anita," Naomi said curtly, barely glancing at her as she swayed with Blessing in her arms. "She's been fuzzy all day." "I don't care, Naomi," Anita snapped, her voice trembling. "I want to see my child." Naomi froze, the words cutting through the air like a blade. She slowly turned to face her sister, her eyes narrowing. "Your child?" she repeated, her voice dangerously low. "Yes, my child," Anita said, stepping forward. "I've done everything you asked of me. I gave you what you wanted, but she's still my daughter. I can't just stay away anymore. I need to be part of our own life." Naomi's eyes blazed with fury. "You promised, Anita. You promised that once the baby was born, she would be mine and you would forget about everything that had happened." "I didn't know it would be like this," Anita whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I didn't know that I would ever feel this way." Naomi's expression hardened. "Feel what way? Regretful? Guilty? You're not her mother, Anita. You never were." "That's not fair," Anita shouted, her voice rising with desperation. "You can't just cut me out like this. I carried her for 9 months. I deserve to be in my daughter's life." But Naomi wasn't backing down. "You deserve nothing. You agreed to do this, and now you're going back on your word. What about the money I paid you? You knew this deal from the beginning. Blessing is mine and not yours." Anita's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. "You can't do this to me, Naomi. You can't take my child away from me. She's my blood, my child." "Get out," Naomi said, her voice sharp and final. "Get out of my house." Anita's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at her sister, disbelieving. "Naomi, please, I just want to be with her." "Get out," Naomi screamed, her face contorted with anger. Without another word, Anita turned and fled from the house, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe it. Her sister had truly cut her out of her daughter's life. The life they had both created, the child they had both longed for, was now completely out of her reach. Meanwhile, Naomi slammed the door shut, her body shaking with fury. She held Blessing closer to her chest, whispering soothing words to calm the baby down. But deep down, Naomi knew the situation was spiraling out of control. She had to do something to keep her world intact. The next day, when David came home with unexpected news, Naomi saw her chance. "I got offered a job transfer," David announced over dinner, his voice filled with excitement. "It's in Canada, our new branch overseas." Naomi's eyes lit up, though she masked her enthusiasm behind a calm smile. "Canada? Wow, that's a big move," she said, playing it cool. "Yeah, I know, but the position is amazing. What do you think?" David asked, clearly hoping for her approval. Without hesitation, Naomi agreed. "I think we should go. It will be a fresh start for all of us." David blinked, surprised by her quick decision. "Really? Just like that?" "Yes," Naomi said with a reassuring smile. "It's time for a change, babe. Don't you think?" What Naomi didn't tell him was that the move wasn't just about starting fresh. It was about keeping Blessing far away from her sister Anita, far away from any threat that could tear apart the life she had fought so hard to create. And as for Anita, Naomi decided that she would never know about this move. Anita's frustration and sorrow grew with each passing day. Every attempt to reach Naomi was met with silence. Calls went unanswered, and when she showed up at Naomi's house, the gatekeeper was always there to turn her away. Anita's heart sank every time the gate swung shut in her face. She would stand by the gate, staring at the large imposing house, her eyes searching for any sign of movement inside. Sometimes she would see David's car parked in the driveway, but there was never any indication that Naomi or the baby was near the gate. The silence from Naomi was deafening. Anita began to worry that something was wrong. She would leave text messages for Naomi, voicemails, but none were ever acknowledged. Each messages were filled with a mix of regret, pleading and desperation. "Please, Naomi, just let me see my child, at least for once." One afternoon, as she was walking away from Naomi's house, Anita noticed something peculiar. She saw a moving truck parked a few houses down the street. It was being loaded with boxes and furniture. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Naomi was moving out. Anita's heart raced. She darted back to Naomi's house, hoping to catch a glimpse of her sister or at least find some clue about what was happening. She reached the gate just as the moving truck was pulling away. Through the gaps in the fence, Anita could see the house was almost empty. The reality of the situation sank in. Naomi was leaving, and Anita had been completely shut out. Desperate, Anita pressed her face against the gate, trying to see if Naomi was inside. She could hear faint noises, but no one came to open the gate. Tears streamed down her face as she pounded on the gate, calling out Naomi's name, but her cries were swallowed by the cold, unfeeling walls of the house. With a heavy heart, Anita turned away from the gate and walked down the street. She didn't know where Naomi was going, but she was determined to find out. As she walked, her mind raced with thoughts of how to get answers. She needed to know why her sister had cut her off so completely and what was going to happen with her daughter. In the days that followed, Anita tried to piece together the puzzle. She contacted mutual friends and acquaintances, hoping someone might know where Naomi had gone. Her search led her to a few leads, but nothing concrete. The only thing she knew for sure was that Naomi was moving out, and she had to act quickly to find her. Anita's once hopeful heart was now filled with a growing sense of urgency. She needed to confront Naomi and get answers that she could no longer wait to hear. The day before Naomi and David were set to leave for Canada, Anita's frustration reached its peak. She had learned about their plans and felt a deep sense of betrayal. Driven by a mix of anger and desperation, she made her way to their house, determined to confront Naomi before it was too late. When Anita arrived, the house was bustling with activity. Naomi and David were in the middle of packing, surrounded by boxes and suitcases. Anita barged in without hesitation, her face a mark of fury. Naomi looked up, her eyes widened in surprise. "Really, Naomi?" Anita's voice was sharp with pain. "You are traveling and you didn't think it is necessary to let me know?" Naomi met her gaze with a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. "We both know it for the best, Anita," she said, trying to justify her actions. Anita's eyes brimmed with tears as she responded, her voice breaking. "The best? I begged you, Naomi. I pleaded with you. I gave in to all your impossible demands. But what did you do? I asked for one thing, just one thing, and you shut me out." Her voice grew softer, but the hurt was evident. "Well, that's fine. I hope you can handle this." Naomi, taken aback by the raw emotion in Anita's voice, tried to respond, but her words failed her. "What are you trying to do?" she asked, her tone defensive but unsure. "Watch me," Anita said firmly, turning to face David. She took a deep breath and made a revelation. "Blessing is mine." David, who had been standing silently, his face a mark of confusion and shock, turned to Naomi. "Babe, what's she saying?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and concern. Naomi stood frozen, unable to provide any explanation. The room seemed to close in around her as Anita walked over to the crib where Blessing slept peacefully. Anita picked up her daughter with trembling hands, her heart pounding. She cradled Blessing gently, tears streaming down her face. The weight of the moment was almost too much to bear. David's eyes flickered between Anita and Naomi, trying to make sense of the situation. The room was filled with a heavy silence, the gravity of the revelation settling in. Anita, feeling a sense of finality, turned and walked towards the door, Blessing in her arms. She didn't look back, her heart aching as she stepped into the night. The door closed behind her with a firm click, sealing the rift between the sisters. Naomi stood frozen for a moment, watching Anita leave. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest, and her hands trembled as she slowly lowered the suitcase she had been packing. David was still seated on the couch, his face pale, his eyes locked on the door where Anita had just walked out with Blessing. He hadn't blinked, he hadn't moved. The shock had hit him so hard, and Naomi knew that nothing she could say right now would make any sense to him. David, Naomi started, her voice shaky. Just let me explain. David didn't respond. He was still staring at the door, as if expecting Anita to come back any moment to undo what she had just done, to give him a chance to process everything before yanking the floor from under him again. Naomi moved closer to him, her legs feeling heavy, as if each step required all the energy she had left. Please, just listen to me. I didn't want this to happen like this. I never meant for any of this. He finally blinked and turned to face her. What didn't you mean, Naomi? He asked. You didn't mean to lie to me? What didn't you mean exactly? Naomi opened her mouth but couldn't find the words. What could she say that would make this better? How could she explain the choices she had made? Every decision seemed to spiral further and further out of control. And now she was caught in the web she had spun herself. I didn't lie to you, she said softly. I was trying to protect our marriage. I was trying to protect us. David stood up abruptly. Protect us? Anita just walked out of this house with our child, and you think this is protecting us? Naomi, what is going on? What the hell is going on? I am sorry, Naomi said, her voice trembling. Sorry for what, Naomi? What is happening? David urged, his voice filled with confusion and desperation. I didn't want you to get hurt, Naomi whispered, her voice barely audible. David laughed bitterly. Too late for that, he said. Way too late. Naomi wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her mind racing. This wasn't how she had planned things. She had thought that leaving for Canada would solve everything, that they could start fresh, leaving the past behind. But the past had caught up with her in the worst way possible, and now everything was falling apart. She attempted to explain, but her voice faltered, her explanation lost in the wake of the confrontation. The perfect life Naomi had tried to create now lay in ruins. The facade of her happiness she had maintained was shattered, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. As she looked around the remnants of their disrupted plans, Naomi realized the full extent of her choices and the price she would now have to pay. David, please let me explain, Naomi continued. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling before she began to speak. Before I met you, I was in the university. I got pregnant, but I was too young and scared, and I decided to have an abortion. I didn't know it would cost me my womb. David froze, the weight of her confession sinking in. What? You can't have children? Naomi nodded. Yes, and when I met Felix, I didn't tell him, but when he found out, he left me. I couldn't bear to lose you the way I lost him too. So I thought it was best to keep it away from you. David's face hardened. So what did you do? You lied to me? You manipulated me? Naomi's voice cracked as she continued. I'm sorry. I didn't want to lose you if you found out. So I had to come up with a plan. Please, I had to beg Anita to help me, Naomi admitted. I convinced her to drug you that night. It was the only way to make the plan work. The pregnancy, my baby bump, everything was staged. It was all fake, she continued. David's jaw dropped. You what? You drugged me to having sex with your sister? Had your sister lie about not knowing anything that was going on? Wow. You're really wicked. Yes, David, I know what I did was wrong. See, you can call me names, but that child is yours. Anita agreed to help me. I even had to induce lactation to make me look like I had her for real. David stared at her, his heart pounding. I can't believe this. I can't believe this. You betrayed me, Naomi. You and Anita, you both. David, I'm sorry. I know I have done terrible things, but I love you and I didn't want to lose you. David shook his head, his mind reeling. I'm sorry, Naomi, you've already lost me, he said quietly. I need time to think, but first, I need to get my child. The next day, David sat, his phone clutched tightly in his hands. After hours of deliberation, he dialed Anita's number. She picked up almost immediately. David, Anita said hesitantly, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I know everything, David said bluntly. Naomi told me about the lies, the drugging, the fake pregnancy. This isn't about you or her anymore, it's about the child. Anita was silent for a moment before responding. What do you want, David? David took a deep breath. I've grown to love her, Anita. I want to raise her. I promise I won't press charges for what you and Naomi did if you agreed to share custody with me. Let me take her to Canada and you can visit whenever you want. Anita sighed, relief and guilt mingling in her voice. All right, David, I'll agree to that. I just want her to have a good life. She will. I will take care of her, David promised. That evening, when David returned back home, his decision was made. He looked at Anita, who has been a shadow of herself since the news of her deceit broke out. I'm filing for a divorce, he told her, his voice firm. Naomi's face crumbled. David, please don't do this, please. You lied to me, you manipulated me, and involved your sister in a scheme I can't even comprehend. David said, his tone cold. I can't stay married to a liar, to a cheat, to someone I can't even trust. But what about us, David? What about the child? Please, Naomi pleaded. I will take care of her, David said. She's my daughter, and I will raise her. But you and I, we are done. Naomi sobbed, but she knew there was no use arguing. A few weeks later, David moved to Canada with his daughter, determined to give her a stable and loving home. He hired a nanny to help, ensuring she had everything she wanted. Despite his anger, he allowed Anita to visit occasionally, keeping things civil for the sake of the child. One evening, as David tucked her into bed, she looked at him with innocent eyes. David smiled, his heart swelling with affection. My little girl, I will forever love you and nothing is going to change that. Though his journey had been marked by betrayal and pain, David found peace in raising his daughter. He had chosen to leave the past behind and focus on a future filled with hope and love for him and his child. Naomi lived with her guilt for the rest of her life. Her relationship with David had ended in a way she hadn't hoped. Even her relationship with her sister never seemed to mend, but she moved on with her life, finding healing in the little way that she could. The moral of this story is that deceit and manipulation ultimately lead to destruction and heartbreak. It highlights the consequences of dishonesty and the impact of trying to control others for personal gain. Trust and transparency are crucial in relationships, and betraying those values can have devastating effects. The story also underscores the importance of facing one's issues honestly rather than resorting to schemes that can damage relationships and personal integrity. Thank you so much for watching this fantastic story on African Stories by Tiana. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more amazing stories. See you next time.